Good morning. Welcome to the panel on quality between compliance, the consumer, and the medical patient. I'm Jen Caldwell. I'll be the moderator today. And I have been working in the cannabis industry since early 2013 when we first had the MMPR come into existence. I work mostly in a quality and regulatory role and have, seen a lot of changes in the industry over time. I have some very educated and experienced panelists with me today. I will like to start by introducing Kayla Mann. Kayla is the CFO of Habitat Life and currently working to meet the needs of both medical patients and recreational consumers. And we'll talk to her more about that in a minute. I have with me also Stephanie Karasik. Stephanie is not only a medical patient herself, but saw a need to help medical patients and is one of the original founders of Strain Print. Dr. Stephen Newmaster also joins us. Professor at the University of Guelph, has been studying the medical benefits of plants and how they can heal the human body for over 30 years. Deals with the genomics of plants as well as plant chemistry, and is really important to what we're learning about consistency and efficacy for medical patients. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Mr. John Grow, who probably needs no introduction. John started more than 20 years ago selling equipment in the cannabis industry, but is best known for his passionate artisanal growing and his real passion for helping medical patients, not only with knowledge and education, but also with product and with growing techniques, and is a huge contributor to this industry. We're going to talk about quality in the industry today, and that means a lot of different things. It originally meant compliance with Health Canada's definition of quality, and what that focuses on is mostly public safety. And it involves such things as making sure you apply good production practices to all of your processes as you grow and package cannabis. It also means passing all the required testing and having your product released in the proper manner by a qualified and approved quality assurance person. We quickly learned that the quality, the base standard put in place by Health Canada, was not all that mattered to consumers. Consumers have a much deeper and broader definition of what quality means to them. And medical patients have even a further definition of quality that involves efficacy and how it controls their symptoms, and a level of consistency that hasn't been seen in the industry up until now. It is a very new industry, the cannabis industry. We're really in just those nascent times. It's just at the beginnings. And if we compare it to, something like the liquor industry or the beer industry, yes, there was a time when we only had Molson. But now if you look, we have dozens of craft brewers who are adding something new and different to the industry. So cannabis is going to be very much the same. As we have time to grow, we're going to see new additions to the industry, new definitions, and a whole new meaning of what quality really does mean. So I am going to hand it over to my extremely qualified panelists today so that we can dissect and talk a little bit more about what is quality, how do we move it forward in the cannabis industry, and what does it mean to different consumers, whether they're medical or recreational. So Dr. Newmaster, I'd like to start with you. What is quality and how do we measure it?
It's a big question. And as I speak today and we hear from all the different panelists, and we're kind of weave this theme of quality. If I put on my hat and think about how do we measure quality in food, and we've developed a lot of these tools at the University of Guelph, it's measured by different metrics, different tests that you can do. And these are validated tests that we publish. And the cannabis industry is quite young when you start thinking about it in the context of selling on the retail market. So selling to retailers or selling through dispensaries and pharmacy. So quality can be measured, as you've already said, through Health Canada metrics to know it's safe, pesticide levels, heavy metal levels are within tolerance limits. I don't want to talk about that today because I think we hear about that a lot already in the industry. I want to talk about other tools that we use to show or to be able to test that The products are consistent from batch to batch. So let me back up a little bit, and then I'm going to stop and I want to hear from other panelists, but I want to talk a little about plant genetics and plant phytochemistry. I want to talk about plant biology. Plants are very responsive, depending on their genome, to their environment. And cannabis is a phenomenal medicinal plant. It responds very quickly to stimuli from light, from nutrients, so fertigation, from even the microbes that could be within their habitat, either within the soil or even within the plant itself. So endophytic microbes, and they stimulate different chemistry. So when you have a grower, really an artist, someone like John growing, he can consistently grow a product that has an expression of different chemistry. So now I'm going to stop and move to chemistry very briefly. So what do you measure? And you could measure terpenes, you could measure flavonoids, you could measure a number of different cannabinoids, CBD, THC, different forms, isomers of them. Anytime you pick one as a scientist, you need a reason for it. Why are you measuring that? How does it interact with the body? And we don't really know much about how it interacts with the body. We're only doing clinical trials now to understand the mechanisms. So approach that I like to take is called metabolomics, nuclear magnetic resonance. It's non-targeted. You get a whole wide spectra of the plant metabolites. It creates a fingerprint. And we can use that fingerprint to show consistency. And that fingerprint, I think, is very important in understanding what are the bioactive minor cannabinoids or minor metabolites that may be interacting with the body. So I'm going to stop there and open this up now to hear from different perspectives, the grower, the user, and we'll come back to this concept.
Kayla, as we've been discussing, quality means a lot of different things. And you work for a producer who provides both the medical market and the recreational market. So how do you manage the differing needs of the two subsets?
It's not easy. I mean, especially at this point in time, I mean, doctor, you could probably speak to it a lot better than I, but even just starting to understand what people want and what people need is two different things. And want and need is two different things. So for Habitat itself, we are focused on kind of exploring a genetic locker, about 180 different strains right now, and as well as how they perform in aquaponics, organic aquaponics parameters to bring those flowers to light. The biggest thing for us, I think, is just understanding the consumer at both levels, what they're looking for, and what those effects actually are. As we all know right now, anecdotal evidence is everything to us as a producer. Specifically, I'd say Twitter is a beautiful space for us to really understand how our products are helping people or how our products are making people happy if it's more on the recreational side. So specifically, we have kind of two lines of products that are coming out. Right now, we have our Cake cultivar, which is a do-si-do and Mandarin Sunset genetic lineage. But it really comes down to what people feel. As we know, it's different for everybody, but for us, it's important that we do hit both of those different target markets. We want to be able to help the people that need it, and we want to be able to help the people that want it. So it just comes down to that genetic kind of vigor and really discovering and putting it out into the world and seeing how that reacts and listening to that feedback and then pushing on those similar lineages and things like that to really hone in on what these people need.
And so, Stephanie, that seems like a logical jumping in place for you. What do the medical patients need? What are the challenges that you're experiencing with quality in the industry?
Right. Yeah. So I'll let everyone know that I was prior to 2014, I had very limited knowledge or experience with cannabis. And when I got my medical recommendation at the time, I think it was the program in Canada was called the MMPR, I believe. Someone could probably correct me. But anyway, what the point I'm trying to make is there were very limited options for someone like myself. Now, I'll just give you a little bit of context as well, is that I am a patient first and foremost. I got my recommendation to help me with symptoms relating from PTSD, depression, anxiety that I struggle with every day. And for me, the initial, I guess you could say, like, introduction to cannabis was that there are so many differences between these cultivars that's a fancy word, but really, like, once I started to figure out what things were helping me, and it's not high THC and it's not CBD, there's a real pocket of products that really help me with my symptoms. Being able to have a consistent supply of those products has been my biggest challenge as a patient for 6 years. In other words, when I'm in a real layman's terms, over the last 6 years, I've had 6 or 7 different products that I've really come to rely on that are now discontinued. I have had products that I have also really had good success with that batch to batch are completely different. You know, one batch will come in at 12% THC and it is amazing for me. Another batch will come in at 19 with different terpene levels and it makes me crazy, like dizzy. So again, it's all about consistency, quality, of course, availability so that I can access it. I mean, those are things that not just for me as a patient, but I'm very dialed into all patients, you know, from having the business that we have now. And it's always the same thing. It's just give me medicine that I don't have to worry about, you know, getting from time. When I also take another medication called sertraline, and it's the same medication. It doesn't matter, you know, how old it is or where I get it in North America. It's sertraline. So it's the same hope for cannabis. Does that answer the question?
It does,
Yeah,
and I
I think
think I think that
sorry,
was
Jennifer,
not
if I
only a
could add really
challenge.
quick.
Sure.
Just on that, the consistency is really what we're trying to push from a quality standpoint. I think that is the main differentiator, I would say, between the recreational user and the medical user. Of course, as Steph has said, it's so important to be able to hone that in. Of course, in an aquaponic system where you're dealing with live fish and, you know, relying on those nutrient levels to bring in creates its own interesting issues for us to be able to hone that in. But that is our hope, is that those terpene levels, that THC level, et cetera, whether it's CBD, if we bring that online, being able to get that to a certain point, I think can be appreciated by both parties.
And John, as someone who has a lot of experience growing in general, specifically for medical patients, in Cannabis Act facilities and in non-Cannabis Act facilities, what are your thoughts?
Well, I see a real benefit coming out of facilities that focus on staying compliant, focus on a stringent set of SOPs, and really adhere to them. I've been in a lot of facilities that don't, and when you see some of the working conditions, some of the grow setups, it's a little less desirable. And when you go into some of the facilities that are really dialed in and following their SOPs and really staying compliant, I think it's quite noticeable. So I wouldn't say the cannabis coming out of a compliant facility would be any better, say, cannabinoid level, you know, THC, CBD, terpenes, flavonoids, all that kind of thing. I don't think you're going to see anything better, but I think long term, when a facility is following SOPs and really, you know, they look at a long-term storage a little differently. Say an MMAR grower or a home grower doesn't have to quite focus on that as much. And I think that's a big difference too. You know, when you're storing cannabis for 6 months to a year, a lot goes into that. So I think, pardon me, I think that's where I would notice a big difference. Another huge difference, I think, in quality would be the pesticide, herbicide, and supplement use. Having that somewhat restricted, I think, is a good thing. On an open market, you see a lot of growers taking shortcuts and developing bad habits. And in a compliant facility, that just doesn't happen as much. So I think overall, for consumers down the road, you know, maybe not in the initial setup, because a lot of these producers are learning and it's a whole new environment to scale up. But I think over time, when they get this dialed in and they really understand their systems, overall, I think the consumer is going to be a lot better off, based on what I've seen.
When we're talking about consistency and quality, you can talk to medical patients who've had a designated grower for years who say that they get consistent product time after time. in the legal industry, in some of our bigger facilities, that seems to be a problem, getting the consistency. How do we assure that batch to batch?
Yeah, it's a great question. It can really build on John's experience because I've had the same experience. I go visit these facilities, and some have very tight controls in good, GMP, good lab practices or good growing practices, and they have these standard operating protocols in place that they follow to make sure they have the same product every time. When I run a metabolomic fingerprint on that material, the variation in the metabolites, these phytochemicals that interact with your body, is very tight. And it's actually within 5% confidence intervals. That means if I measure it 10 times, I get, I got 95% of the same metabolites in all 10 times that those batches come through. Now, conversely, if I go into some of these facilities and I'm looking around and they don't have the tight constraints, and there are variables that aren't tightly controlled, for example, light or humidity, then even though they pass Health Canada requirements and it's safe, they have high variability in the metabolites, and that will impact the user. That's why you get variability in what you use. And we in the industry right now, we haven't had a way to be able to measure that. That has only come out in the last year and a half, really, that we started to build a registry and have a consistent way of measuring quality.
So Kayla, as working in a licensed facility, we tend to equate quality from the Health Canada definition with clean cannabis, but it's a lot more than that. Some of the things Dr. NEWMASTER was addressing about tightening in, your inputs and whatnot. How do you work with that in your facility to try to bring about that quality and consistency?
Yeah, I think, both of my founders, co-founders, were in the MMAR space for a very long time, MMPR, grandfathered into MMAR, and that's really where they got their excitement about, the genetic differences and things like that. And, coming from that space over into the legal space, within the Health Canada restrictions that are put upon it for everything from, from moisture to mold to all these different things, moisture into mold, I should say, but those minimal limits that are there, it creates a whole different set of priorities almost to hit first, especially as a micro producer, before you can even start to hit those other qualities that are really important, such as the consistency, trying to hone in on that variability, trying to create SOPs as you go. Sorry, that is my puppy screaming in the background here. Sorry, he's only 3 months, so he can't be left alone or he'll just cry in the next room. So, but for us, it's really been obviously about passing those restrictions properly, and now kind of pulling into it. So it's been really difficult. And for anybody who has been set in their ways for 10 years, like my founders have been, in how they've been growing, thinking they're doing it great. They've got science backgrounds. They appreciate clean cannabis. It's a whole new set with Health Canada, because they've taken and I'm sure, Doctor, you can talk more to this, but what's healthy, and they've even brought it down even way further, right? And that's for total good reason. But it makes it extremely difficult for a grower who has been, doing things in their own way, or for us who are doing it in a brand new system that's never been done before. It creates a whole new set of parameters to tackle first before you can kind of get to that. So to John's point of, how the legal space is evolving, I think it's really important to note for consumers, if there is a bit of variability, as long as it's within something that works for you, praise those guys that are doing that right, because they've gotten through a big feat to be able to hit those first clean parameters and now get that consistency and that dependability for that medication for a patient. That's a massive feat in the legal framework. And I think it goes very underappreciated, because again, the best growers, we all come from the black market. We all come from doing this for decades and being really proud of that, and doing it either as a designated grower or for ourselves. Some of us have been making our own oils to treat eczema and urticaria and things like that. Some of us have been going that far into it. but we haven't had these parameters to work within. So I think it's really important that people do have patience and try hard. I know it's hard, especially with the prices. It's a pricey way to experiment, but I think over time is going to be when we start to see those qualitative differences between suppliers, that they either are really going the mile and making it done, or they're just there to cash out, right? So I think that's kind of a really cool side of the quality thing that you're going to start to see between different producers in the legal space.
So Stephanie, as a medical user, I'm actually going to ask this question to Stephanie and to John from their perspectives. Do you think that the quality that's been implemented into the legal system has benefited the end user, the medical patient or, consumer?
You want me to take this, John, or do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
No, listen. I want to preface anything I say by saying that, like, we're so fortunate to live in Canada, where we have access to this, medicine that is, arguably has some ways to go in terms of consistency and all the things that we're talking about. But, overall, as a patient, I always count my blessings first and foremost, because I still can get access to something, even if it's not, a 10 on 10, at least I'm getting something that's helping. So from that perspective, I think, it's still, like you said earlier, it's a nascent industry. There's so much more that we're gonna get from our learning. And yes, as Dr. NEWMASTER said that there's clinical trials. We've had our app out for 4 years right now. We have real-time observational data on people's experiences with their symptoms. So we know if they're suffering from a headache that was an 8 on 10, and they take this particular strain at, however many inhalations, it goes down to a 4. That's pretty good. That's pretty good for a patient to start to notice these things. But in terms of like the consistency from the grower side, like I have such immense respect for you guys and what you have to, the gauntlet that you have to go through to get that. So I'm not really one to kind of, to slam or to say anything too negative. It's not my thing. I wish that it could happen faster, because I'm a patient and I wish I had access to, medicine. And you know what, I also want to say, my father was a pharmacist. So I grew up, my whole life with, really having a lot of respect for molecular science and medicine. And cannabis it's not really molecular to me. It's plant, and it's like I don't want to use the wrong words here, but it's there has to be some kind of variability. I don't know. I like it in a plant form. I don't like it in an oil or even a capsule. It doesn't agree with me. So I'm relying on, as much as we can, have consistency with that plant. That's all I can hope for.
I think that's a really good point, and something we've seen even physicians have difficulty with when they were able to prescribe cannabis is the more natural form it takes, the more variation you have, and to make it very specific dose, very specific consistency, it has to become more pharmaceutical-like, and that is a bit of the problem. John, I wanted to ask you, how as a grower, we know that we kind of talk about quality in two different ways, the safety and the applications and the compliance. We're also talking about quality and efficacy and smell and sight and terpenes. And how do you as a grower try to combine those two and meet the quality by Health Canada's definition and quality from a consumer definition?
And I just want to interject one thing, John. Just one thing. Yep. I do want to say that, and I think it's a valid point to be made, because it's such a relatively new industry. When we talk about things like terpenes and cannabinoids and flavonoids, like, people don't know that yet. I'm not the people that are watching this probably, and certainly not the people in this panel, but most people just if they want weed, they want weed. They don't really know that there are all these distinctions. So I think sometimes it's easy to kind of get caught up in that, in that language. But we have to sometimes pull back and remember that the mass public that are going to be consuming the products that you guys are putting out, they don't really know. They're just we're so far
They
ahead.
put their faith, the mass public puts
Yeah.
their faith in people like us to make sure that we do know that, so that they can sit back and know that they don't have to. So that's
Agreed.
something that people like us have to, we always have that desire to improve, because much like when I go to eat at a restaurant, I don't want to eat my own food. I personally don't care what went into it, don't care how he cooked it. I just want to eat a good meal and walk away happy. And I put my trust into that chef, knowing that he's going to cook the food and I'll pay the bill happily, and it'll be good. So I think a lot of people, the mass public out there, puts their faith into the people in the positions, to instill that trust, and we're in a position that, they want to see us make those right decisions for them. So that's why, like Kayla was saying, with like genetics and whatnot, they don't know all that stuff, but they trust that the company that they're supporting does know, or is continually working on that to make it better. So I think when you sign up to sort of play in this game, there's sort of a unwritten code and some unwritten rules and responsibilities and roles and responsibilities that we absorb. And I think one of those is that, to make sure that whatever our game is, that we're the sharpest on it, and making sure that we can at least have some of that answers. I know as a grower, every day, I've been doing this for so long, and I still learn something new. Every time I'm in the grow room, or every time I log on Twitter, or every time I do something like this, I just walk away, realizing how little I do know, but that's what keeps me excited and motivated in this. So, but to your question, one of the things, oh, sorry.
I just said it's humbling.
Yeah, it's an exciting career choice we've made, and it definitely is humbling. It keeps you motivated to always want to learn, and when you see results and you get excited about things, and you see a patient come back and say, this changed my life, or it made a big difference, that's a big motivation to the day. So, but to your question about what are some of the things I see that would based on quality from both sides. I think one of the things as a grower, to always dial in quality, whether it's on the recreational side or a medical side, because I think there is two different levels of quality. What a recreational smoker is going to look for if I was to give a jar of cannabis or like dried flower to a recreational smoker, they're going to be looking for a lot of different characteristics in that jar than a medical patient would. As we were talking earlier, I'd been in some focus groups, and I was shocked to discover how many people wanted milled cannabis. And they don't know what a flower was supposed to look like. They don't know what's good, what's bad, what's a quad, what's a AAA. They just don't know. They don't know the consistency it's supposed to be ground up to burn properly.
That's the key. That's the key. Yeah.
And so they said, as much as I'd love to look at a beautiful flower and it looks good on Instagram and it looks good on Twitter, I don't know what I'm looking at. And I attributed that to the coffee beans. How we said, I don't drink coffee, but I love the smell of a coffee bean. But I wouldn't know a good bean from a bad bean. But I know if I picked up a ground coffee, because I make my roommate coffee every morning, I know what the ground beans are supposed to be, the consistency. But I couldn't grind my own beans properly, so I would prefer to buy it ground. And when somebody hasn't had a lifestyle around cannabis where they're looking for a flavor or a certain effect, they're just looking to medicate. That batch consistency was the biggest thing we heard in focus groups, and the milled product, because it was simple to use. So, when you look at quality like that, that's where you want a clean cannabis, something that's been stored long term properly, dried to the proper percentages, so that when that package is cracked at 6 months, it's not going to taste good. It's going to turn to dust when you look at it wrong, but at least it doesn't have mold and bacteria on it. And a person like myself who's maybe growing at home might dry and cure, and we think it's the best, but do I know that it's perfectly safe after 6 months? No, I don't. I can say I think it is, but I really truthfully don't. So I think that's where that quality level is higher. But I think when it comes to growing, I think the number one issue with a grow room to dial in quality for both recreational and medical is the environment. I think any grower has to have a sense, it's a palate for the environment. When a grower walks into the room, you can feel it on your skin, you can feel it in your hair, you can feel it on your eyes, you can taste it in the air. You know what the conditions of the room are supposed to be. You can set it, you can feel it, you feel it on your skin, and you just know that's the temperature, that's the humidity, that's the airflow I'm supposed to feel. And I find once I dial in my environment, doesn't really matter what genetics I'm using, what methodology, or what fertilizer, my crops are consistently always better. So much like a chef or, I don't drink wine, but a person who drinks wine, they have a palate for a good wine. And I think a grower has a palate for a good environment. And when you can sense that environment, that's where I think you differentiate good growers from mediocre to growers that are learning. And we've all been at those different stages, but I think that palate is developed over time. And that would be about the best way I can describe it. So when you have your room dialed in perfectly, whether it's rec, whether it's medical, I think your quality level is going to be at the best. I think when the quality comes to long-term storage, that's going to come to that's where a whole team is involved, because I might be a decent grower here, but I don't know all the parameters around storing it for 6 months properly. I don't know how to run that machine to test the levels of moisture. Like, there's a lot going on that goes into that long storage. So I think that's where the quality level is a bit better.
Those are some great points, John. And you actually brought up a question I wanted to ask. Dr. Newmaster, what is the shelf life of cannabis?
That's a great question, and it's related to dose, and it's related to consumers wanting to understand dose, and also for physicians who are hesitant to prescribe because they don't know dose. So here's a little primer on the chemistry in all plants, really. There's an oxidative process. In the presence of oxygen, the molecules change with time, and some of them change more quickly than others. So THC and CBD are ones that change really quickly. Terpenes oxidize very fast, especially in the presence of heat. So if you're doing a sterilization treatment with heat or pressure to sterilize the material, give you an example, you blow off all terpenes on the cannabis in 90 seconds. They're gone. I can measure them before, I can measure them after. But this is talk about stability. We do stability studies where we say, okay, if we know it's an oxidative process, let's put it in a container and see how long it'll last, and then measure it through time. And that's the experiment. Well, you would think that plastic containers are airtight, but they're not all airtight. Some breathe, they let oxygen in. So you have to find the right containers to keep it at that proper quality. And the feedback that you want is from people like John, the growers, who really are the connoisseurs, and they understand what quality is from different perspectives of smelling, tasting, seeing, color, and then the users who use it. So I would love having that feedback and then match it with the metabolomic profiles through time in different containers. Sounds like kind of a boring experiment, but the beauty of it is I see these metabolites changing. I hear about the response from patients, and we have the input from those who really understand the quality of cannabis just from handling it. People like John, we put it all together, and we can learn so much about what is the right cannabis for the right person. Because at the end of the day, it's really about its ability to make people's lives better, whether they're enjoying it or they're using it for health. And so as an ethnobotanist, we've been doing that for thousands of years. That's what we do at the end of the day. The science of explaining when and how, well, that might give us a metric to help guide us to do a better job. But at the end of the day, that feedback is key.
I agree.
And it's not an
we unfortunately have, sorry, Kayla, we've used up just about all of our time, but I don't want to let such an experienced group go without a chance to share some of your wisdom. So we'll start with Kayla, and what are your last comments, Kayla, or knowledge you'd like to impart before we have to close off?
Yeah, I think, from a quality perspective, we don't know what quality is. To Doctor's point there, Newman, something that's been aged a little bit and changed could be the perfect thing for somebody. Something that's fresh off the harvest, been cured for 10 days, looks gorgeous, could be that for somebody else. So we're all just in a world of getting to know it better. And I just think that everybody just needs to do their due diligence and trying to understand that plant more and why they're using it. And, that's the recipe for getting somewhere in this industry.
Thank you. Stephanie, what do you want to leave us with?
Well, I would, once again, and there's such an immense knowledge on this panel that I have so many questions for all of you guys. But yeah, I just want to say that representing patients, certainly, that patients, for the most part, the ones that I've met, which are many, they care. They care because this is their lives. It's likely they've tried a million other things before they got to cannabis, right? They've probably had a gamut of failures or less successful things than cannabis for them. And so, yeah, they care. And so the journey of having this kind of process sorted out. And one of the other things I would mention as well is that because of supply and demand and sort of not figuring out like just quantities, like I've gotten product that's a year and a half old from a, I don't want to say who, but that's disheartening as well. So trying to keep fresh inventory, consistent supply, that is, as much as there has been a more of an interest, I would say, in rec users from all these new companies, I think the medical patients really are very worth listening to and can only improve the quality overall of the industry and of cannabis products. And I'm very, very interested in what some of these micro growers are going to be able to do now that they have such talented growers on their teams. Yeah, it's patients, putting patients first, I don't think will ever do you wrong.
No. And if I've learned one thing in my time in this industry, it's that actually a lot of rec users really are medical patients. There's a reason that they're, that's right. Dr. Newmaster, what last thought would you like to leave us with?
I'd say pay attention to these metabolite fingerprints that we're working on. They measure the minor cannabinoids that we think are very important in healing. If you follow the research that I do on LinkedIn, we'll keep educating. So stay tuned.
Thank you. And John, our final message.
I think I'd like to say to people that, with all the negativity around a lot of the legal cannabis and a lot of the quality and some of the prices, everything that I've seen in all the facilities and in talking to all the people and meeting people is that it's continually getting better. And I think a lot of people put high expectations on some of these producers. They scaled up too big and things went awry. But, you see producers online like Habitat, North 40. Some of the quality I see some coming out of these producers, it's mind-blowing. It's stuff you see on the internet, and you think it's beautiful to see. So I think it's only going to get better. I think the quality is getting better. I think the prices are going to start going down. And I think you're going to start seeing a lot more producers that really do care about patients and the end users a lot more than the end bottom dollar. And I just think the industry is only going to get better. So I'd like to see some of the negativity sort of fade away. And I have an optimistic future, or, I see it as an optimistic future ahead. I think things are going to be good. So that's what I'd like to say. Yeah.
I agree with you. We're brand new and we're already light years ahead of where we thought we would be at this point, right? So nothing but optimism.
10 years ago, would you have thought we'd be where we are today? And think of where we'll be in 10 years from now. Nothing's perfect, but it's pretty amazing we even have what we have. So
yeah, absolutely.
That is an excellent final message. Thank you. Thank you to all of the panelists, and we will be taking questions, but thank you very much for being here and for being a part of this panel. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.